Do you sometimes wonder how you could truly have an impact when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? How do you know you are moving in the right direction when it comes to becoming a more inclusive individual? As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod brings topics such as ethnicity, genders, sexuality, or religion on the table. We talk about research and science, but also emotions, feelings, and vulnerability. We discuss allyship, advocacy, and privilege. But most importantly, we talk action. Because without action, we stay still. And when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, stillness is never the answer. Welcome to As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod.
In this week's episode, I have the great pleasure to be speaking to one of my good friends, Kakkar, about women leadership, cultural diversity, and how to create an inclusive workplace. Diana is the founder and chief executive of MAES London, a luxury garment manufacturing studio that specialises in designer womenswear. She launched MAES London in 2018 to make premium manufacturing more accessible to fashion designers. MAES stands for SEAM spelled backwards. Born and educated at the top university in India, she moved to London because she believes it is the most exciting city in the world of fashion. As a fashion designer herself, with more than a decade's experience in the industry, she hopes her experience in and passion for garment construction will provide support to many of the world's top fashion designers and emerging talents. At the heart of MAES London is the delivery of a good product. Diana understands the quality and attention to detail required by luxury womenswear designers. Whether it's sampling, development, small production, or consultancy, she guarantees a premium service that respects the designer's ambition and helps them to realize their vision. Before setting up MAES London, she had run the atelier for a luxury London Fashion Week designer, which caters to members of the royal family, including the Duchess of Cambridge and the Duchess of Sussex, as well as Nicole Kidman, Reese Witherspoon, and many other A-list celebrities around the world. Let's give Diana a very warm welcome for this episode of As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. Okay, Diana, welcome. Welcome so much for this episode of As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. I'm so grateful to have you here. How are you doing?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and very much looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. I have this feeling we're going to have an amazing conversation, actually. I mean, you and I have already connected several times and talked a little bit about different topics that we're gonna look into today. But yeah, I think it's going to be a very, very exciting episode. But before we start and jump in right into the topic, what I wanted to ask you, I always ask people, is what's your story?
Oh, wow. How much time do we have?
We have as much time as you want.
Well, as you know, but maybe for your listeners, my name is Diana, and I am I'm Indian by birth, and I've been living in the UK for now almost 10 years. I have been very lucky and grateful that I've been able to choose a career which is very close to my heart, and I work in the fashion industry. I studied economics before actually studying fashion, but deciding to make it a career path and being able to not only just provide for me, but running a business and provide for my staff, doing something that I love doing every day is something that I don't take for granted. And I think I'm really lucky to be able to do what I'm doing.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for sharing. So many things already, I think, to unpack. Female, person of color, living in a different country and a different culture, in an industry that we will dig a little bit into, but that is kind of seen as quite often female dominated, but actually you specifically in the area you're working in can be actually very male dominated as well. We talked a little bit about generations as well, and what's happening behind that. So I think the first question I want to ask you is, what are some of the challenges that you have encountered in your journey and up to where you are now?
Um, I think fashion can be very much observed as a female-dominated industry, but some of the best fashion designers are actually male fashion designers, and I think historically we've always been catering fashion to women, so it was probably driven by the women as consumers. But now, as times are changing, dare I say, it's now becoming more gender neutral instead of just women dominated or male dominated. So the consumer is changing, and that's actually driving the industry behind the scenes as well. Where the design part of the industry is, that is probably equally male and female, but in the manufacturing, which is the area that I run my business, MAES London, in London is primarily male dominated, not only just in London, but even in other parts of the world where I have been to other factories in the Far East Asia and India and even Europe. Most of the factories are owned and run sometimes by generations, and it's, usually the father would have started the business and passed on to one son, another son would have taken it over. So for me to have studied fashion, worked in the fashion industry, and then deciding to start my own manufacturing studio in London was probably pushing water up the hill, because it was a path least taken. And I think I've spoken to you quite often about this, that when you are in an industry where there are no other similar situations or role models who are driving the industry, sometimes you can start struggling to see if you're going in the right direction, or what are your signposts to tell you that, yep, you've completed phase one, now you're in phase two, because you have to drive your own motivation. And that can affect, well, I know it has a massive imposter syndrome in the creative industry, and something that I quite often ask myself, if everything that we are doing in the industry towards helping that is enough or not. I guess because in the creative industry, you can't quantify your success. How do you quantify a beautiful piece of garment, or how do you quantify a beautiful piece of work or beautiful art? It's subjective. So, and the qualitative compared to quantitative can make a big difference in quantifying how people are feeling.
So you mentioned, I think, something that is very important here about the imposter syndrome, and obviously I imagine at times that means it has a huge impact on your own self-confidence as well, and who you are and where you are in your journey. What are some of the things that you've seen helped you move forward and keep going? Because I know our listeners don't necessarily know MAES London very well, and I hope they're going to go and check it out. But in the last few years, you've built an organization that has grown massively. So you have had many successes on the way, I know that. But as you're mentioning as well about that self-confidence and then the imposter syndrome, how did you overcome maybe some of these challenges on the way?
Maybe I should start with what MAES London actually does and how we started the business as well. So I worked in the fashion industry for many, many years, and I realized that there was a little bit of a gap in the market between designers and who were making the clothes. And with everything going on in the world and sustainability becoming a big conversation starter, I decided to put all my savings and start a small manufacturing studio in East London called MAES London. And the idea of MAES London was to make clothes locally for designers who were based in London. And I quit my job started the business in 2018, and I had 0 clients and 0 employees. And now 3.5, almost 4 years in, we're looking at, now I think we've got 250 accounts, and out of those 250 accounts, I have 80 to 90 accounts live at any given point of time, and we've got 20 employees. So it is, you look at it from the outside, and it's, it's what you would say classic success story. But what we don't see behind is what's actually happening with, say, the founder, and the challenges that the founder is probably facing. And right now, the business is bootstrapped. So one of the first challenges, like any other entrepreneur might probably relate to me, has been cash flow. And with the uncertainty that Brexit and the pandemic has been able to, implement onto our business, has been challenging to say the least. But what that has a massive impact on is it challenges the process of natural flow of thinking. So if something which would be so easily black and white before, now it has to go through realms of decision making and ifs and buts. And as soon as the ifs and buts start coming in, there's a sense of doubt which comes into your decision making. And when that sense of doubt starts creeping in, you just need like that pinhole space for the sense of doubt to come in, to start becoming, is this the right decision, or am I doing it the right way, or what are other people doing? And I try not to, but it's also not hard. It's hard not to think about it in the current situation where people are saying, what are the other people thinking of this decision? And when I say other people, I don't necessarily mean the external climate. I sometimes look at my internal stakeholders, like my staff members, my business partner, my line managers, like what are they thinking of the business? Because it's a young business and it's challenging times for everyone. And yes, I've kind of been able to steer it through the challenges that we've seen in the last 18 to 20 months. And it's taken a lot out of me personally, because I had to find the courage and my purpose of why I'm doing this to keep going. Because the easy option was to pack up your bags and say, oops, well, I tried and it didn't work out. But on the other side, I've just been able to push through it, and pushing water up the hill is probably the best way to explain it.
And I like the how you're talking about this why and this purpose. I think I was going to say in many businesses, but not just only in businesses. I think in our lives in general, we do go head down in one direction, sometimes forgetting that we need to think about our why and our purpose and the reason why we're doing the things we're doing. And I think it's a beautiful way to phrase it, to say, okay, being able to go through these challenges is about remembering what's the bigger picture at the end of the day, not just the bigger picture for the business, as you said, but the bigger picture for myself as an individual. One question I wanted to ask you, actually, I'm curious. You mentioned about your business partner. You didn't mention, I think, that he's a male.
Yes.
So he's a man. Do you notice actually differences between the way he approaches things and the confidence with the business in comparison to you, how you approach those challenges?
That's a really good question, and probably a difficult one to answer, because Josh, my business partner, he doesn't come from the fashion industry. He actually comes from the media industry. So he's an outsider to the industry, but an insider to the business. While I'm an insider to the industry and, of course, insider to the business. So the way I approach a situation is with a sense of familiarity. So that when you approach a situation, a decision with a sense of familiarity, naturally your confidence is higher. And when he approaches a new situation, instead of thinking that the confidence is lower, he actually goes naturally into a problem solving situation. So he'll say, okay, I don't know the situation, I don't know the process, but instead of saying, I'm not going to make a decision, or I'm going to step away and let someone else make a decision, his approach would become, how can I find out more information about this, take my time, and come back with a solution. And that has been a very good learning for me, to work with someone so closely and see that approach. And it doesn't come naturally to me, because as you probably would have guessed, and with the leading question, if I'm unfamiliar with the situation, I would probably step aside and give way to someone else to take the lead. And quite often, and all the books that I've read about, women in leadership, that's a very common trait for women, to be in that position where they feel, they may feel that there's someone else who could make a decision. And it's only women, I feel, who are more self-aware and are aware that there's a sense of confidence. They take control of the situation. And I hope I don't offend anyone by saying what I've just said right now, but this is, based on my personal experience. So my learning from working with Josh and as my male counterpart is, one, his approach to working is very different. And second, approach to him being a male in the industry is very different too, which I don't take for granted again, because I guess, it could be, it's a very traditional industry. So there has been thoughts processes which are hard to kind of brush away and, convince them that this is a new way of doing it, So sometimes we have to accept the reality. We're not afraid of challenging it, but we are very much accepting that there is a difference in perception of people who are looking at a male founder versus a female founder, especially in the fashion industry.
I can imagine, indeed. And it's interesting because you were talking about self-awareness at one point, which made me think about, so often we hear, and I think it's applicable when we look at the difference between genders, but I think it's applicable for many other kind of differences we may have in a workplace or in an environment where maybe you are in minority, in the sense of you're the smaller group. So it could be gender, but it could be ethnicity, it could be, as you said as well, generation. So if you're working with people who have been in the industry for years and years, and you're coming in as that kind of young, with that young mindset and new ideas, that could be difficult as well. So there is something that we hear often, which is sometimes it's called mirroring, where people kind of try and fit in that mold that others have kind of showed as this is what works, even though it might not work, but it seems to be at least that's what works. But when you were talking about that self-awareness, I was thinking, how do you remain kind of true to yourself in an environment like this, where maybe you have that pressure to kind of adapt and become someone else because that's the standard at that point in time or in that environment?
Oh, loaded question. What did I sign up for? Definitely the minority, not in gender, because in our company, we are quite, we are more women than men. I think probably 60% women, 40% men, which is, something which has changed from last year, because it's a conscious decision that I'm trying to make it more diverse in our company. Even within age groups, it's a decision, it's part of the recruitment process for me as well, where I'm consciously trying to make my company more diverse, not only just gender, but age groups and generations. And ethnic diversities and even cultural diversity, so that we create an ecosystem which is reflecting of the current times that we live in. But I have to recognize that as the leader of the company, I am probably a young leader in this industry, where I do face those challenges, where people are questioning that this is how it's been done before, why are we changing it?
Mhm.
And at this point of time, I always remember one quote by I think it's Baz Luhrmann in Wear Sunscreen, and he says the race is long, and in the end, it's only with yourself. And when I listen to that quote, I think that there's a mold, and that mold has been set for people who probably need a sense of comfort for a little bit. And once they outgrow that mold, they should be doing their bit of challenging the status quo. Because if they continue staying in that mold, they're either going to restrict their growth, or they're going to look for a bigger mold. And at some stage, I outgrew my mold and decided to move to a bigger mold. I decided to not look at a mold and find what I could actually give to the industry, and which meant that I had some corners that I needed to probably, sand and sharpen and, provide to the industry. So in that way, I have been able to adapt to my own methods, and that takes a big toll on you, because you are sticking to a decision that you're making and saying that this is the way that we should be doing now as the new disruptors in the industry. But behind the scenes, sometimes you question yourself, I hope I'm making the right decision. And all you're thinking is, well, I'm a young company, I'm making this decision, there's only one way to find out. And the one way to find out is it's either going to work or it's not going to work. And if it's not going to work, then I need to observe what decision I made and make a note in my diary that never to make that decision again. And if it did work, well, hurrah, you just uncovered something which didn't exist before. And that's been the motto of MAES London, and trying to challenge how we're approaching fashion and manufacturing, because the two industries are so ancient. Like, we've been wearing clothes forever. We've been making clothes, before even cars were made. So it's traditions that we are kind of challenging.
Yep.
And in an industry where fast fashion is becoming, in an age where fast fashion is becoming an industry, so we're kind of holding on to traditions while also adapting ourselves to the current time. So it's been an interesting learning curve.
I can imagine, definitely. But it's a beautiful journey you're talking about as well, which is lovely to hear. Another thing I wanted to ask you, actually, because I think it would be interesting as well for listener to hear a little bit about kind of tips and tricks and things that could help them move forward and maybe become more inclusive and more diverse. There is more and more research actually showing the importance of networks and support networks to help you, one, be more inclusive and more diverse, but as well obviously grow that confidence and that you remaining true to yourself that we were talking about before. What have you seen works for you? What worked in terms of those the support networks?
Well, having an accountability partner has been the best resource. And I think at this point of time, I should probably highlight what are the things that I found challenging and how I overcame those challenges, because people don't realize that people who may have their own jobs and may not be running their businesses, and these could be your listeners, they don't realize how difficult running a business is until you start running the business. And everyone who decides to start their business is probably warned by someone who is running their own business that it's going to be challenging and that you should be ready for that challenge. Like I was, by many people saying running your business is probably the toughest thing. Why would you leave a secure job and run your own business? And at that point of time, you just realize that you're in a race with yourself and there might be no one else. So you have to like find your own direction. So that can be really, really challenging and quite often isolating as well. And something that I struggled with quite early on when we started the business, because I didn't have friends who were running their business and I didn't have women friends who were running their own businesses. So relating to my friends who I've known for years was starting to become a little different, because the challenges that I was facing was very different to the challenges that they were possibly facing in their jobs. And when I use the word isolating is when you could see that people could be possibly going away on holiday and I couldn't afford to go on a holiday because I had put in all my money in my business. So all of these thoughts start making you feel as if you don't belong to a certain clique. And these are all things that is happening in your own head. It's not as if your friends were doing anything, but the challenges that you're facing are so unique to you. And then you start meeting other business owners and realize that these are the same challenges that they have. Yeah. So there is suddenly a sense of comfort in that and solidarity in entrepreneurs. But within a few days, weeks, you'll realize that each business owner has their own challenges. So even though it was the same set, the challenge, if I had cash flow problems, someone else had profit problems, someone else would have client problems or staff retention problems. And all of these are aspects of the business that each business owner could have. So suddenly you could find, you were in a room full of people who had similar challenges, but they didn't have the same challenges. So you had to carve out your own path. And that's when I realized that having accountability partners and defining very clear-cut answers or questions, what you were accountable to this person, was very important. So I have a friend and I would just tell, she would probably recommend reading a few books, and I would tell her that I would, get back to her on these books by the end of the month. And I would. And by doing so, what I was trying to do was learning something. I was able to learn about a business aspect, but also be able to connect with someone else on a similar learning curve. Yep. And it started giving you some kind of support in the industry. And I had some friends who were women, and I have some really good male friends who have been able to help me through the challenges of being an entrepreneur, and help me with self-doubt, and help me with confidence building, and also help me celebrate the success. Because very often when you're in this zone of trying to achieve the next target and trying to grow to the next target, you actually forget how far you've come. And having those friends around you who remind you, like yourself, how you just did, is very, very important to celebrate that success.
That's a beautiful thing to say, and indeed, it's true that in that journey to confidence, as you said, with that quote, it's a race against yourself. But at the end of the day, because it's a race, that means also there is those points on the way that you need to celebrate. You need to kind of step on the podium and say, yeah, I have achieved this. Okay, maybe there's a little bit more to go to. There is the next event and the next Olympics game and whatever might come next. But you need to stop indeed and celebrate and remember that you've made things happen. That's also indeed how you create that confidence. I wanted to ask you one. Yeah, go for it. Sorry,
I just wanted to say, and winning is not all that matters in the race. Showing up is more important than winning.
Mhm.
and just, tracking your progress is probably more important. So it's not always about winning.
Very true. One thing I wanted to kind of come back to, because you were talking about creating that diverse environment, and you mentioned a number of areas of diversity that you want to have within the company, from gender to ethnicities and cultures and age as well. Um, what are some of the benefits you've noticed already from having such a diverse team?
Oh, wow. Okay. Cultural sensitivity has been amazing. Uh, People have, I mean, first, I've been made aware of different people's habits in different parts of the countries and different parts of the world, um, and how people behave. And it's not about um, talking habits or eating habits or dressing habits. It's about the thinking habits and how the value system is so defined in, I guess, where people come from, and how people kind of think and what their society values are, and they are offspring of the society values. So that has been really, really key, and that transpires amongst the team, which is like the good things kind of transpire amongst the team, and habits are transpiring between from one staff member to another staff member, which has been really good. Then we have a few staff members who are fairly young and they are bilingual. So they have been able to teach different words of how to greet each other. So I've been hearing thank you in like 5 different languages during the work environment. And what that's doing is, even if people haven't traveled quite a bit, it's making people aware of how things are said. I mean, one of the we have English lessons on Tuesdays between 5 and 6 p.m. at the studio, and we have so many different languages. And one of the things that came up was the word thank you, and how in some cultures, thank you amongst friends, family, colleagues is not required. And in English, it's, the necessity. So like saying something like no thank you or yes please, the please and the thank yous were not necessary in some of the languages. And how I've been able to kind of not educate is not the word, but share how in England those words are so important has been an eye-opener for some of the staff members where they're not native English speakers. And now what I'm hearing in the studio is everyone's using the pleases and thank yous very generously, which suddenly makes the whole room sound very polite, which is a transition that we've been able to achieve as a team because that awareness has been created.
Yeah.
And what I'm hoping to do is that these people who are part of our team go out of MAES London ecosystem and are able to touch other people's lives wherever they are, and probably spread the message in whatever realms they are in. And that's the legacy that we're trying to create. And this is just a very small example, but you have thought processes about politeness and thought process about different work ethos and cultures, and the positive ecosystem that we are creating within the company is not only just helping the company, but helping the individuals and thereby helping their family members. And that's a chain reaction that we are starting.
And that's a very good point. Actually, we forget sometimes when it comes to our journey of being more inclusive and more diverse and more equitable, that actually those small things are the ones that are gonna possibly sometimes have the biggest impacts. And as you said, we forget that how there is that ripple effect, not just on the people that we are working with, on ourselves, obviously, but as well the close people we work with or we live with, but actually it goes further than that. So it's a great reminder actually of one of the benefits of of being more inclusive in our everyday life. And it doesn't take much, as you said. It's just a let's share some of the words from our own cultures that have different meanings or are used in a different ways. It doesn't have to be very complicated. So I'm glad you highlighted that as well. Thank you.
I think, yeah, one of the examples was one of the ladies. She said that she learned yes, please, which is a very basic thing. But she went for her son's parent-teacher meeting, and when she was speaking to the teacher, she ended up saying yes, please, instead of yes or no. And when she was walking out, her son, expressed gratitude to her mom, saying thank you for saying yes please, or that was not rude, or something to that extent. And you forget that this is creating this team spirit within the company, where people are saying, okay, I learned that from MAES London.
Mm-hmm.
And so that positive reinforcement is the value system. And when we are talking about MAES London, we are very people focused. So for us, we are trying to make an impact not only on our internal stakeholders, but also our external stakeholders, by giving them this seamless service, which is of good people working on good products. So yeah, hopefully these small little decisions and changes will make a massive impact on people's lives.
And I'm sure it will. And I'm glad to hear about you talking about indeed that set of values that is so important in having, in running your business and creating that environment and that culture at the end of the day that you want for MAES London. So thank you. We're coming to an end of our time. What's one thought that you would like to leave our listeners with?
Like any thought? Are you going to give me some kind of parameters? No. Well, I think it all comes down to belief, and either belief in oneself, or belief in a thing, or belief in a purpose, whatever you're finding that purpose. And that for me has been habit forming. So we have to remind ourselves that if you're doing something, whether you're in a job for the last 15 years, or you're planning to start a business in a new industry, or quit your job to, retrain as an electrician, all of these are coming from an internal belief that we have in either ourselves, or a purpose, or the big picture. And I think we have to define these big pictures and learn to form a habit of reminding ourselves every day to believe in this, because the everyday grind can chip away that belief from us every day. And we have to feed that belief ourselves to find and achieve whatever goals, targets that we are putting for ourselves. Otherwise, it's really easy to, fall off the track and, decide that there's something else out there for us and this didn't work out. So fueling yourself with whatever you're believing in is probably the superpower.
Well, I'm very glad that you didn't influence this question, because we wouldn't have such an amazing answer otherwise. So,
thank you.
last but not least, if people want to get in touch with you, I'm sure if they have questions or they want to learn more about yourself, MAES London, what you're doing, maybe they're young entrepreneurs as well who are carving their path in a world where they're the first ones going through that path. How can they do that? What's the best way to reach out to you?
Well, they can Google my name, Diana Kakkar, or go on my LinkedIn, which is Diana Kakkar, which is Kakkar, or just Google MAES London, MAES London.com, and you'll find me right there.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Diana, for being part of this episode. I'm so grateful to have you.
Oh,
And
thank you.
I look forward to the next one, where we're going to talk about Other things, anything.
Many other things.
Yes, I'm sure
But
we
I
still
hope I
have a
did
long list
justice.
of things.
But I hope I did justice to some of your very heavy questions. So, but thank you for having me.
Thanks again.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. We'd love to hear from you. To catch all the latest from us, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.